But starting off with the offense, and there's a few spots on offense that are very, very easy to figure out. And, none bigger than quarterback. Kamario Taylor is Mississippi State's starting quarterback. I think a lot of people assumed that the second he stepped on campus, that in 2026, Kamario would be the guy, which is a fair assumption to make. And look, I think once you went through the season, you saw him getting a package to where he was going to be involved right away as a true freshman, seeing that role increase over the course of the season. And then by the end of the year was State's starter for the Egg Bowl and then for the Mayo Bowl. Kamario is the guy. He is the key piece that Mississippi State is going to be building around at the quarterback position, building around the roster. I shouldn't even say the quarterback position. It's not just the offense. It is the entire team when you talk about Kamario Taylor. And that's a guy that you're hoping as a sophomore, you see in a full offseason preparing as the starter, getting that experience he did as a true freshman. Can you see it all start to click for him? Some of the areas where as a freshman he was still having to grow a little bit. Can he put that all together? Can State put the pieces around him to make sure that you are maximizing his potential? Because obviously he's an incredibly talented player. And that was a big thing we talked about this offseason, is that you've got to put the pieces around him to make sure that you have a real quality team in place around Kamario Taylor to lift him up. But he's the guy at quarterback. He is a particularly special talent, and that's who you're building around building around the team. I keep wanting to say around that position. You're building the offense around him. Backing him up, State's got a couple of options there. We brought in two transfers, A.J. Swan out of App State, Jaden Rashada out of Sac State. And we've talked about these guys a little bit. Swan being sort of the veteran who began his career at Vanderbilt, was a starting quarterback there, made starts within the SEC. Then you talk about going to LSU, didn't really play there, but then transfers to App State, was again a starting quarterback. I think lost his job, then won it back, and then suffered an injury and was sort of done for the year. The guy's been around. The guy's played a lot of football. At times has played well. But the idea was you needed to get an experienced player in there to back up Kamario. If something were to happen to Kamario and you had to turn to a backup, you wanted a guy that you think could be a steady hand, and that's sort of the idea with A.J. Swan. Jaden Rashada, coming over from Sacramento State, this is a guy that, obviously his name is a bit infamous now in college football because he was one of the first big NIL controversies coming out of high school, where he was committed to Miami, flips to Florida based on the premise that he was going to be getting this big-time NIL deal worth north of $9 million. That deal falls through after he signs with the Gators. He ends up being released from his letter of intent, goes and hits the portal, goes to Arizona State, plays some as a true freshman, gets hurt, has to hit the portal once, ends up hitting the portal once again, goes to Georgia where he sits for a year as a backup, comes back as a starter in the 2025 season, going to Sacramento State, kind of stepping down a level, thinking, okay, now he's going to get settled out, loses the job there, right? So this is a guy who was a big-time talent coming out of high school, a lot of hype around him, and it just hasn't worked out for him in his career. The reality is, though, he's a guy that still has a pretty high talent ceiling, and he's someone that Jeff Levy tried to recruit out of high school. He's someone Jeff Levy looked to bring in as a transfer a couple of years ago when you ultimately brought in Blake Shapen. He's not coming in here to be the starter, right? But he is coming in here as the idea of, look, he still has some high upside. If you had to turn from Taylor, if Rashada shows you something in the offseason, maybe you can go to him instead of A.J. Swan and say, look, he's got more raw talent, has a little bit more athleticism. He's not a runner, so you're not a guy. He's not talking about being a guy that's going to step in and give you what Kamario Taylor does with the offense. But can he be a guy that plays, gives you a little bit more of that escapability in the pocket, something that A.J. Swan is not really going to bring you? You have that. So you got a couple good options there. Obviously, he's not listed, but Brody McWhorter is a true freshman. I think that's the big thing by getting Swan or Rashada is you can just – you redshirt McWhorter, keep him a year behind, and you're set there. Moving to running back, and I think Fluff Bothwell, that is your clear number one starter. After last year sort of splitting that duty with Devon Booth, really the last 2 years you kind of had split duty with 2024. It was Booth and Johnny Daniels. This past year, Booth and Bothwell. Fluff Bothwell is the guy at running back for Mississippi State. I think Xavier Gayden is a player a lot of people were optimistic based on some of what you had seen, the flashes, a true freshman, flashes early this past season, that maybe he could elevate to that spot where you feel confident in him sort of being that guy you're splitting carries with him in a starting role. But I think clear number two right now behind Bothwell Obviously, some different style players where Bothwell's more of that physical in between the tackles runner, kind of grind it out, where Gaden's more of the get to the outside, try to find a crease and hit an explosive play. Um, I think those are going to be your two guys, though, that you really lean on heavily at running back. And, I have listed as more depth options Colin Wilson as the redshirt freshman out of Gulf Shores. Didn't really play in his true freshman year, but another one of those explosive type players where, speed and space is sort of the idea. And I think J.J. Hill, a Tupelo as a true freshman, has the opportunity to step in. Again, it kind of has that similarity to Bothwell in that he's a more physical between the tackles type guy. I think he'll have an opportunity, but I think there's a chance though you really just see Bothwell and Gaden sort of lead the way here. And it's been talked a lot about with Levy, this idea that he likes to play running back by committee, and there's some truth to that. If you look at most of the offenses he's called, they've rotated backs frequently. You can kind of think of it from the mindset of that they run a ton of plays, so they're going to rotate bodies more, especially when so many of those plays they are just handing the football off. You need to have a good rotation in the backfield, but I think because of that, people have this idea of you got to have a really, really deep running back room. And I think State does, but at the same time, I think you might really see it lean on the first couple of guys. I really do. I think you do have to factor in the fact that you got Camario Taylor, who's going to be taking a lot of those carries. Levy's had the dual threat quarterbacks before. He's had guys that can run. And I think Matt Corral at Ole Miss was a guy that he ran quite a bit. But even then, I think Taylor's more of a guy where you are truly scheming up the run game with him in there more so than you did with Corral. You're probably talking an average of 10 carries a game for Camario Taylor, probably 8 to 12 designed carries, or at least options to carry for Taylor a game. So with that in mind, where are your other touches in the run game going? Well, Bothwell is going to take up probably 15 to 20 of those in a given game. Gaden's probably going to get around 8 to 10. Where do you go from there? Could Wilson contribute? Sure. Could J.J. Hill contribute? Absolutely. I wouldn't be shocked if J.J. Hill I didn't put Cooper Crosby. He's got the opportunity as well. Could both of those guys as true freshmen make an argument to get on the field? It's certainly a possibility. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if you redshirt those guys, even for as talented as they are. And look, I know there's talk that State need to go out and get a running back in the portal because I think people were not blown away with Bothwell down the stretch last season. Gaden did not take the step forward people were kind of looking for. I think you're okay. I still believe Fluff Bothwell, when fully healthy, can be a really good running back for State. I think Gaden, you're going to have to be more selective with how you use him unless he does show more development. But I like what you've got from a skill set standpoint with him, that you can still find ways to mix in touches for him. I don't think State needed to go out and get another stud running back. I think they're good with what they had. And especially, again, Camario as a runner, being a factor, I don't think they had to go and find another body in that room. I think what they have, they can work with. And I don't think you need to be talking about rotating between 3-4 running backs consistently. I think having a top two, which really, in Levy's time at State, that's kind of what he's done, to be completely honest. Like, he hasn't really gone to the number 3 back frequently through 2 seasons. So I think it's going to be your top couple guys. Wide receiver, outside receiver, I've got Marquise Johnson from Missouri as one of your starters. And then I'm going with sort of an or. I've got Aiden Williams or San Francisco McGee. With Johnson, I think he's clearly coming in as, it's another speed threat. He was an outside receiver, big play threat from Missouri that didn't always get to be maximized because of the pieces around him. You just didn't have a quarterback that was consistently comfortable with making those plays down the field. You're going to be comfortable doing that in this system. I think he is stepping in and is going to play that Brennan Thompson role of who is our top guy to take the top off the defense. I think it's going to be Marquise Johnson. So I think he's in for a huge, huge season. With Aiden Williams and McGee, it's interesting because you're talking about a couple of guys who there's been so much talk off the field, but not as much on the field. With Williams coming out of Ole Miss, every offseason there was a lot of hype for him in Oxford. You would see the clips coming out of practice. He was making these big-time plays, and it just never really happened on the field. We had the one big reception at Ole Miss. I think they were playing Mercer. That was kind of it for him. Didn't make much of an impact. Comes to Mississippi State, and again, you're hearing a lot of good things about him. In the spring, he had an incredible spring game, and it felt like him and Camario Taylor had a really good connection where they could make some big-time things happen. And you just didn't really get it with him. Now, he did take over as a starter in the back half of the year. I don't want to completely misrepresent. Like the fact he became a starter speaks to the consistency that Jeff Lebby saw of him. I think that's why he took that job from Jordan Mosley. Is Williams felt like a guy that I think Lebby viewed as a steady hand. And one I've talked about, I think he's the best blocker that they've had at receiver, which was such an issue for so long throughout the season. Having a guy that could actually hold his own out wide so you could throw some of those quick key screens, that's big. But he was also pretty sure-handed. When you did throw him the football, were they explosive plays? No. But he was going to reel in the catch more often than not and sort of be able to fight ahead for a little bit of extra yardage. He, I think, took advantage of the opportunities he was given. He was not the big play threat that you're looking for in this offense. Can he finally be that? Because he's a guy that, again, the potential has been flashed that he could be that. Does that happen in 2025? San Francisco McGee feels like a guy who could be that. Now, we've seen all the clips from him out of practices, and it's 2 straight years. I mean, even go back to his true freshman season. So much talk of like, man, that guy's special, right? And he had a big spring game alongside with Aiden Williams. He had a big camp, and people were like, man, Frisco McGee, going to play a role. You just didn't see him. He just did not play. Now, steps into the bowl game with Brennan Thompson injured and catches a big play for a touchdown and shows some of that explosive capability that has people excited about his potential. Can he continue to build off that? I think those two are battling for that starting job opposite of Marquise Johnson. I think both of them are going to play a good bit, but I'm really interested to watch throughout the spring Williams and McGee. Does Williams finally break through and be the player that we've been talking about for 3 years in the state of Mississippi? Does McGee finally reach that potential? And, for him, he's still younger, right? This is his 3rd year of college football, redshirt sophomore. Hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities. Some of that because Lebby just doesn't rotate the receivers the way that he typically might, or the way that other programs might. He kind of goes with his top guys. But look, some of it is other guys are just going to be more consistent. So I'm really interested to see how that pans out. At backup, the only guy I've got officially listed is Zion Ragens from Oklahoma. And I think he will play outside. Yes, he's a smaller, shiftier type kind of, but he also has the top end speed. And we've seen with Lebby, he does not care if it's a smaller receiver, if it's a 5'8" guy who's 160. If you can haul butt, Jeff Lebby's going to put you out wide because he wants you to get those one-on-one opportunities, take the top off the defense, we'll throw deep. That feels like the role Ragens is going to play. He didn't get to really do that at Oklahoma because of just that offense being so dysfunctional in 2024, but he was playing outside because they felt he could be that type of player for them. So I think he's stepping in and going to compete for that type of a job within the offense. I put freshmen in question mark because, look, I think there's an opportunity. Any of these freshmen, Zion Crumpton, Jaden Creation, and Keemian Henderson, really talented group of receivers coming in from Mississippi State, all guys who have an opportunity to contribute right away. It's just a question of, is any one of those guys going to emerge? And also, is Lebby going to play him? Because as I just talked about, he doesn't rotate the receivers all that much. The only time he's done it is at Oklahoma 2023, when he really had a deep receiver room that he felt they wanted to rotate through those bodies. And I think also the way they were throwing the football that year, it made sense to rotate receivers kind of air raid-esque in terms of how they handled that room. The way he typically runs his offense, you kind of have your top 4 or 5 guys, and that's sort of it. And that's what we've seen at Mississippi State so far, that's part of why I didn't even go with somebody officially here at outside receiver, because I think Johnson, Williams, McGee, and Ragens those are your top 4 at the outside receiver spots. I would be surprised if somebody else steps in. I wouldn't be surprised, but I feel like right now those are the 4 you feel most confident in. Slot receiver, it's Anthony Evans, coming off a big year, lead the team in receptions, over 800 yards, and, going to see if he can continue to build. Can he chase a 1,000-yard season? Can he continue to develop that relationship with Kamario Taylor? That's going to be a big thing to watch. Grayson Harris behind him, who last year was one of the guys in the slot as a backup as a true freshman. Didn't play much, but Ricky Johnson transferring out kind of gives some clarity there. Could one of the freshmen step in? Zion Crumpton is the most slot type of the 3 freshmen to come in, but Creation has experience playing in the slot as well. Crumpton has the speed to be an outside guy. We've talked about it with Lebby. You can't just assume because it's a smaller guy. And Also, Crumpton's still like 6 foot, so we're not talking about a short receiver there. You can't really just assume, but I imagine one of those guys is going to get put at the slot. So I won't be surprised if you see one of those guys get listed as a slot receiver on the depth chart, probably as the number 3. But I know Grayson Harris was someone that they were excited about coming out of high school as well. So we'll see if his role can expand. Tight end, I think, is a very interesting position. And I'm going with Sam West as your starter for now. I thought he played pretty well in the opportunities he got. Was better as the season went along. Could still grow as a blocker, but probably was the best and most consistent blocker that they had a season ago at that spot. They were comfortable having him put his hand in the dirt and, occasionally, block defensive linemen, which he wasn't like outstanding at it, but they felt good enough about him to put him there. And look, some of the opportunities he got as a receiver, I thought you saw some shiftiness with him. You saw this is not going to be a guy that you're taking shots to down the field, which, they didn't do it enough, in my opinion, but occasionally with Seydu, they took those shots down the field. West, you're not going to use him in that way. He's going to be an underneath check down type option, hit him in the flat, maybe get him on an out route, corner route, or a crossing pattern, but you're not taking the shots down the field to him. At least to be surprised. But right now, the most experienced guy in the room who showed you some moments last year, I think he's your starter. At backups, I'm going it's kind of obvious. Like, you don't really have a lot of options. I could see this going either way. Like, Riley Williams comes over from Oregon State, who started his career at Miami, and Miami was kind of more of a receiver at tight end, I would say, than a blocker. He showed some flashes and played a lot as a true freshman in 2023. Saw that role diminish in 2024 before transferring to Oregon State. But, showed some flashes that he could be a receiving threat. Oregon State, he gets up to like 270 pounds, and he becomes more of that inline blocking tight end. I don't know if he's a great blocker, but I think clearly you're bringing him in because you want someone that you feel confident can be sort of that people mover up front. You want a guy like that within that room. Can he get back to being a real receiving threat, which I think that's kind of the thought you want him to be that? We'll see. But he's your bigger frame type guy. Zayon Cotton is the one that I'm most interested in, though. The 4-star freshman out of Grenada, really played receiver in high school at 6'5", 215, just that big body, putting outside, let him win one-on-one. We're going to throw it up to him. And he was dominant in that role. Absolutely fantastic in that role. Has some good speed, can win one-on-one, can just go up and get the football, can also has a little bit of shiftiness in space. Is he a smooth route runner? No. Is he a dominant blocker yet? That's the thing that we haven't really seen because we haven't played him at tight end. He was playing receiver. Now, blocking the DBs across from a receiver performed well. When you're 6'5", 215 and you're blocking a 5'7", 140-pound high school corner, I expect you to dominate. So that's going to be the big question for him. But he fits that mold as a receiving threat that kind of is more in line with what I think Lebby likes to use. Braden Willis at Oklahoma, Seydu Traore here at Mississippi State. I think Lebby likes to have that guy that is more of a pure receiver who can do enough as a blocker. The question with Cotton is, can he get good enough as a blocker right away to step in and play that type of role within the offense? Definitely going to have to put on some weight. Probably need 15, 20 pounds put on him to feel good about that. And then just show you, can he do it? And you don't need him to be a dominant blocker. You're not asking him, can you be a 6th offensive lineman out there, go head-to-head against a 280-pound SEC defensive lineman and win that battle? Can you go get a block on the second level on a linebacker? If we put you out in space, can you get a block on a screen against a safety? Can you trap block on a split zone play? Just get in the defensive end's way. You're not having to go head up against him. Just try to knock him out of the way just enough to let the running back get upfield. That's all you really have to ask of him. And if you can do that, I think that's the guy that you probably want in there and the guy who could probably maximize your offense the most. I hit on this a few weeks back, talking about, the top right tight end for this offense, what you're looking for. And this is not at all original thoughts by me. Ian Bull at America's War Game, I've referenced him a lot, does a great job breaking down the scheme stuff in this day and age of college football. And big thing that he talks about is when you have a dual threat quarterback, really having that true receiving threat at tight end is almost the best possible world to be in, because by having a dual threat, assuming you've got a running back who's also talented enough, and I think Fluff Bothwell is, especially because Fluff Bothwell specifically is a guy who is good at winning between the tackles when maybe the blocking isn't the cleanest. If you've got that and a quarterback who can run, you feel confident that you should be able to run the football adequately. If the defense is going to give you a light box, you should be able to run the football and do so effectively, which means it's less important that you have a tight end that is this outstanding blocker. You don't need a tight end who can just be a people mover. Can he do just enough in the blocking game? Then we can get him out as a receiver because we've got the run game taken care of because what we have at quarterback, we want our tight end to be a guy that we can throw the football to and trust to be a good route runner and be a weapon down the field. Cotton is that type of guy. Throw a red zone threat, throw it up one-on-one. He is that type of talent. So I think your best case scenario is that Cotton, who was an early enrollee for State, got to go through the bowl practices and is going to get to go through now these winter workouts into spring practices. Can he get his weight up? Can he be an adequate blocker? I think that's who you're looking for, hoping to get that job. But right away, I'm going to trust Sam West and Williams as the more veteran guys to get the job. O-line, let's talk about this. And the way that I really broke this down was I went with State's got 5 offensive linemen with pretty solid experience one way or another. Those are the 5 guys I've got starting. So left tackle, Brandon Snee from UAB. Left guard, DJ Chester, LSU. Center, Cannon Boone. Right guard, Blake Steen, coming back from injury, moving inside from tackle to guard. And then right tackle, Miles McVay from North Carolina. And I've talked so much about experience being so valuable in the offensive line. Wanted to have those guys that have got the game reps. You've got 4 offensive linemen with extensive starting experience, and then one more, McVay, who hasn't been a starter but has played quite a bit. Right now, until I start to hear of these younger, less experienced guys making an impact, those are the guys I'm going to assume you see step in. Snee is the guy that you kind of has brought in to be your left tackle, especially once you lost Javen James and you didn't get Jordan Seaton. Like, okay, we have to have somebody. That's a guy who's been doing it. Is he going to make that transition from the American up to the SEC, especially when some of the concern is that he doesn't have the best size? We'll see, but that's who you're kind of counting on. And I think I labeled him as State's most important transfer this year. The guy that they need to hit more than anybody else is Brandon Snee from UAB. DJ Chester, 13-game starter at center for LSU in the 2024 season. And had a few other starts this past year. Was not the best lineman for the Tigers, took his lumps mostly at tackle. But again, I've talked about it a few times. It was not that he was rock solid as a center either. He had some issues there as well. But there's been a lot of talk that he could fit really well at guard. He is a veteran guy who has started in the SEC. And I've said this a few times as well. If he had truly been unplayable, Brian Kelly wouldn't have played him. So that's a guy who is going to step in, and I think you're putting him at guard because you got Cannon Boone coming back. Him getting that 6-year eligibility was big to have that more experienced player returning. And I think Boone will hold on to that role too, because center being a job where you got to call out things and obviously understanding your terminology, how you want to block things up within your system. Boone's done it for a year now as a starter. So I think he continues that role as your starting center with Chester going to guard. Right guard, Blake Steen, I think it's one career start at right guard in his career back when he was at Virginia. Mostly was a starting right tackle. But I think for State's case, they don't have a ton of experience along the interior of the line. They also don't have a lot of options along the interior of the line. I know LJ Perdome has come up a lot, and you see I've got him as the backup at both guard spots, and that's a possibility as well. I think my initial thought was Steen would be your starting right tackle, and then you got Perdome as one of your starters at guard, and then you got McVay as a swing tackle. I could definitely see that as well, but right now I'm leaning with the experience. Kick Blake Steen inside, which is something that has been talked about was a possibility, and then put McVay out at right tackle, where he did that at North Carolina. Also played left tackle in North Carolina. He will compete for that job, I would imagine. But he's a guy that we've seen be able to play both sides. Got a lot of reps. Was promising down the stretch for UNC. Again, if State's going to have 5 guys that have experience up front, these are the 5 that I think how it works out, how you make it come together. In terms of the backups, you'll notice that a lot of the backups are the same guys. Chester is going to be your backup center because he's done it before. I already mentioned Perdome. If you have a guy go down at guard or one of the guards has to make a move somewhere, I think Perdome steps in there. Miles McVay is probably your backup at left tackle. And I think Blake Steen, if you needed him to go back to right tackle, you put him there. Now, if you had multiple injuries, had to make multiple shuffles, how does this all work out? If you had to get to a third string into these spots, Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins and Saquon Miles as your two JUCO transfers at tackle. Last year, both took red shirts. That's probably where you're turning at one of those spots. TJ Lockhart is the only other guard with real experience. And that's part of why I talked about this idea of moving Blake Steen inside the guard, because State didn't really, you added a couple guys in the portal, obviously with Perdome and Chester, who have been those inside players. But in terms of guys returning on the roster, Lockhart's the only one that has seen any sort of action at offensive guard. Not to say you couldn't move anybody in there. You could definitely find a spot to do that. But I think that's who sort of makes the most sense. So, yeah, I went with the 5 guys that I think all have experience. That's how I broke it down. So, real quick, just running down my starting lineup for the offense. Quarterback, Kamario Taylor. Running back, Fluff Bothwell. Outside receivers, Marquise Johnson, and then either Aiden Williams or Sanfrisco McGee. Slot receiver, Anthony Evans. Tight end, Sam West. Left tackle, Brandon Snee. Left guard, DJ Chester. Center, Cannon Boone. Right guard, Blake Steen. Right tackle, Miles McVay.